step out the vehicle, now!
Don't yell at me! I'm U.S. Army!
I don't care! Hands up,
And my
higher!
hands are up! Stop acting crazy!
Turn around! You're not special here.
Touch me and you'll regret it! Call your supervisor!
The checkpoint lights cut through the dark like cold blades white strobes flashing across windshields, faces, and badges. At 9:47 p.m., a black SUV rolled forward with the steady patience of someone trained under pressure. Inside sat Captain Marcus Hale, U.S. Army uniform pressed, ID ready, eyes calm. He'd been through war zones and roadside ambush drills, but nothing prepared him for what waited here. A rookie officer stepped too close, hand already twitching near his belt. And in seconds, authority became violence. Before we begin, take a breath and stay with this story. Because what happened at that checkpoint wasn't just about one officer losing control. It was about what power does when it meets dignity. If you want justice stories with truth and depth, subscribe and keep watching. A routine checkpoint on a quiet county road was supposed to be simple. The kind of overnight operation that shows up as a single line in a shift log. The kind supervisors call visibility enforcement, the kind the public barely notices. A folding table, a couple of orange cones, portable floodlights mounted on a metal stand, and the constant hum of radios bleeding through the cold air. But on this night, it didn't feel routine, it felt like a test. The fluorescent canopy lights cast a harsh, unflattering glow over everything, washing faces into pale masks, turning every shadow into suspicion. The air smelled like exhaust, wet asphalt, and old coffee from a thermos sitting on a patrol hood. Tires rolled slowly, crunching gravel at the shoulder. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped, as if even it was listening. At 9:47 p.m., a black SUV slid into the checkpoint lane and came to a clean, controlled stop right where the cones directed. No hesitation, no hard braking, no confusion. The driver's window lowered halfway. Inside sat Captain Marcus Hale. His uniform wasn't loud. It didn't scream for attention, but it carried a weight that didn't need permission to exist. Pressed fabric, clean lines, rank placed with care. The kind of uniform that had been worn through ceremonies, inspections, and long, punishing days where discipline wasn't optional. Hale's posture was upright, shoulders squared, the look of a man trained to keep his emotions from leaking into his hands. And his hands were exactly where officers always claim they want them. Visible. Open, calm. Before a word was even spoken, Hale had already taken away every excuse. The interior light clicked on softly. He lifted his driver's license and military ID slowly, like someone who understood procedures and wanted no confusion about intentions. His voice, when he spoke, was level. "Evening, officer. How can I help you?" Those words should have ended the tension before it began. But the rookie officer approaching the window, Evan Griggs, 24 years old, 6 months out of the academy, didn't read the scene the way Hale expected. Griggs had been trained on threats, compliance, command presence. He'd been told, indirectly and repeatedly, that hesitation was danger, and that being questioned meant losing control, that people who stayed too calm were hiding something. So when Hale didn't fidget, when he didn't stutter, when he didn't apologize for existing, Griggs didn't see safety. He saw defiance. He walked up too fast, boots striking pavement like he was trying to announce authority before speaking it. Flashlight in hand, the beam cut through the SUV like a blade lingering on the steering wheel, the console, Hale's face. The light wasn't searching for weapons. It was searching for a mistake, something Hale would do wrong, so the power dynamic could be rebalanced. Griggs leaned in. "Where you headed?" he asked. It wasn't the question itself. It was the tone. The assumption underneath it. Like Hale had already done something, like the burden of innocence belonged to the man in the vehicle. "Home," Hale answered, returning from a base ceremony. The word ceremony hit the air with quiet dignity, no bragging, no attitude, just fact. A normal statement, a normal life. But Griggs heard something else. He heard, "I'm better than you." His jaw tightened. His shoulders rose slightly. Like the uniform in that seat had touched something personal, like it had triggered an insecurity he couldn't name. There's a specific kind of fear that doesn't look like fear of being disrespected, fear of appearing small in front of other officers, fear of losing the only thing holding your identity together. Control. Griggs shifted his feet and glanced sideways toward the other units. The older officers at the table weren't watching closely, but they were there. And rookies don't just police civilians. They perform competence for their peers. Griggs spoke again, sharper now. "Step out of the vehicle." Hale blinked once, just once. because that didn't make sense. There was no odor, no slurred speech, no erratic driving, no probable cause. Checkpoints can verify license and sobriety in some jurisdictions, yes, but they don't justify escalating just because the driver looks composed. Hale didn't argue, not at first. His eyes stayed on Griggs, steady but respectful, like he was deciding whether he was dealing with a professional or with a child holding adult authority. "Officer," Hale said calmly, "may I ask what the reason is for stepping out?" "I'm happy to comply. I just want to understand." That was it. That was the trigger. To a trained leader, that sentence was responsible. It was reasonable. It was the language of cooperation. To Griggs, it sounded like pushback. A rookie's ego doesn't need facts. It needs dominance. And when dominance feels threatened, it escalates. The quiet kind of escalation first, the change in tone, the shorter breath, the shift of hand toward equipment. Griggs leaned closer. His voice dropped, but the edge grew sharper. "I said step out." The glow of the floodlights made the scene feel unreal, like an interrogation staged under a stadium lamp. The checkpoint canopy above them fluttered slightly in a cold wind. Hale slowly set his IDs down, carefully, as if aware that sudden movements become storylines. He opened the door and stepped out. Even then, his body language stayed controlled, hands slightly raised, palms visible, no sudden turn, no attitude, just calm. But calm can be a mirror, and some people hate what it reflects. Griggs circled him like a man trying to find weakness. The flashlight beam flicked across the uniform, lingered on the rank insignia. Hale didn't flinch. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He stood with the quiet discipline of someone who had been trained to keep breathing even when adrenaline screams. And that made Griggs angry, because Hale wasn't nervous, because Hale wasn't begging, because Hale wasn't smaller. Griggs barked the next command louder, more theatrical. "Hands behind your back." Hale's head turned slightly. "Am I being detained?" he asked. Still calm, still procedural, still giving the officer the chance to correct course. The senior officers at the table began to look over now, not rushing, not intervening, just watching, the way people watch when they sense something is going wrong, but don't want to inherit the responsibility of stopping it. Griggs' cheeks flushed. He heard the question as a challenge. He stepped forward into Hale's space. And then came the third command, the one that wasn't about procedure anymore. It was about ownership. "You think you're special because you're Army?" Griggs snapped. "Out here, you do what I say." That's where it shifted. In that moment, the checkpoint stopped being a traffic operation and became something darker, a psychological dominance play. Hale, standing under the harsh light, could feel it. You can tell when someone isn't enforcing the law anymore. You can tell when they're enforcing their ego. Hale didn't raise his voice, but his silence carried a heavier authority than shouting, and the rookie mistook that silence for disrespect. Griggs grabbed Hale's arm, not with caution, not with procedure, but with irritation. The kind of grab that says, "I can touch you because I can." Hale stiffened, instinctively, because every soldier has training that reacts to sudden force, but he didn't resist. He didn't swing. He didn't step back aggressively. He just said, almost under his breath, "Officer, don't do this." But Griggs wasn't listening. He was too far inside the storm of his own insecurity. His radio crackled with a dispatcher's voice, background noise now irrelevant. The cones, the paperwork, the checkpoint purpose, none of it mattered anymore. Power had replaced policy. Under those hard fluorescent lights, with the whole night holding its breath, the line between policing and domination was crossed, not in a big dramatic leap, but in a small, ugly decision. Griggs tightened his grip. Hale's stance stayed firm. And the atmosphere changed, like a camera pushing closer, like sound draining out before impact, because the next moment would decide everything. The story doesn't move forward right away. It sinks downward into the space where uniforms stop being uniforms and start becoming human beings. Because what happened at that checkpoint wasn't only a clash between two men. It was a collision between two inner worlds, two different understandings of power. Captain Marcus Hale had spent years learning one brutal truth: authority without discipline is danger. In the Army, power was never meant to be loud. It wasn't measured by how hard you could shout or how quickly you could intimidate someone. It was measured by how steady you stayed when your blood turned cold, how controlled you were when chaos tried to own you. In combat, leadership wasn't a vibe, it was survival. If you panicked, people died. If you acted out of ego, men didn't come home. That training left marks on Hale, but not the kind you could always see. He carried himself like someone who had learned to absorb fear and convert it into focus. Even his silence had structure. Even his breathing sounded practiced. Like he had trained himself not to give panic an opening. When he looked at Officer Evan Griggs, he wasn't looking at him with hatred. He was looking at him with the steady caution of a man who could sense an unstable weapon. Because Hale recognized something that most civilians don't recognize fast enough. The danger wasn't the badge. The danger was the insecurity behind the badge. Griggs had the uniform, the flashlight, the duty belt. But underneath that equipment was a young man with a nervous system that hadn't yet learned restraint. He was only 6 months out of the academy, fresh enough that his boots still shined, fresh enough that he still believed command presence was something you could force into existence by acting tougher than you felt. And that was the problem. Police academies don't just train tactics, they train identity. They teach rookies to see the world through categories: compliant, non-compliant, threat, unknown threat. They drill it until the brain starts anticipating danger, even when danger isn't present. Use of force policies are read aloud in classrooms: continuums, escalation levels, objective reasonableness. Instructors repeat it like scripture. You need to control the scene. You need to go home tonight. But what they don't always say directly, what gets taught in tone, in jokes, in sideways comments, is that fear is embarrassing, that hesitation makes you weak, that an officer who looks unsure becomes prey. In those unspoken lessons, a rookie doesn't just learn procedure, he learns performance. And Griggs was performing. At the checkpoint, he wasn't simply checking a vehicle. He was proving himself in front of senior officers who had been doing the job longer than he'd been an adult. Their presence hovered in the background like judges in a silent courtroom. It wasn't just Hale standing there. It was Hale, and every fear Griggs carried about not being respected. So when Hale spoke calmly, when Hale questioned the logic of being ordered out, Griggs didn't hear cooperation. He heard a threat to status. Calm can be insulting to a man whose authority is borrowed. It implies you aren't afraid. And for someone like Griggs, that's not just confidence. That's rebellion. The checkpoint lights hummed overhead, radios popped with fragments of dispatcher chatter. A car in the next lane rolled forward slowly, the driver craning to see what was happening. Every extra pair of eyes added pressure. It's a strange thing how quickly a scene becomes theater when uniforms are involved. Hale stood by his SUV, hands still visible, shoulders still squared. He wasn't trying to dominate, he wasn't trying to win, but he was a soldier, and soldiers don't shrink for the comfort of insecure men. That posture alone made Griggs feel smaller, and when people feel smaller, they either humble themselves, or they lash out. Griggs stepped closer again, too close, the type of closeness that isn't necessary for communication, the kind that invades personal space as a warning. Hale could smell the coffee on his breath, could hear the tightness in the young officer's jaw when he spoke. "You got an attitude," Griggs said, sharp enough for the others to hear. Hale didn't blink fast, he didn't play the ego game. "No, officer," he replied. "I'm trying to understand what's happening." That sentence should have been the bridge back to professionalism. But Griggs didn't want a bridge, he wanted submission. "You understand when I tell you," Griggs snapped. "Hands behind your back." For a fraction of a second, Hale froze, not because he was afraid, but because his mind ran through the implications like a checklist. Detained. Arrested. Under what legal basis? Checkpoints have limits. A stop without cause has limits. A detention without articulable suspicion has limits. Hale knew that, not as a lawyer, but as a man trained in rules. The military runs on rules. A soldier's life can depend on them. "Am I being detained?" Hale asked quietly. Griggs' eyes flashed. That question was procedural. Normal. Constitutional. But to a rookie addicted to control, it sounded like a courtroom argument, like disrespect, like Hale was making him look foolish in front of the others. And now, the moment wasn't about policy anymore, it was about pride. "Turn around," Griggs ordered again, louder this time. "Don't make this difficult." The senior officers glanced over. One of them shifted his weight but didn't step in. That's how it often happens. Not everyone in the room is cruel. Most are just tired. And tired people avoid conflict, even when conflict is necessary. The silence of supervisors can be louder than yelling. It sends a message: do what you want, just don't make me deal with it. Hale's voice stayed controlled, but there was steel under it now. "Officer," he said, "I'm complying. I'm not resisting you. But I want you to understand, I'm U.S. Army. I just came from." He didn't even get to finish. Griggs cut him off with a sudden motion. A hard step forward, a hand, reaching out, not cautiously, not with training, but with irritation. It wasn't a professional touch. It was the kind of grab meant to punish. The moment Hale felt that grip on his arm, his body reacted with instinct older than conversation, not aggression control. Muscles tightened, posture stabilized. Soldiers are taught to protect their balance. They're taught that sudden grabs are danger. Hale didn't swing, he didn't shove, but he anchored himself, and that anchoring looked, to Griggs, like resistance. In reality, it was restraint. But Griggs didn't understand restraint. Not yet. In his mind, Hale not folding instantly meant Hale was challenging him. And the fear of looking weak is a powerful poison. It makes men do violent things while convincing themselves it was necessary. "Stop resisting," Griggs shouted, loud enough for witnesses, loud enough for the body cam microphone to record a justification before the action. And that's when the storm that had been forming in slow motion finally broke. Griggs yanked Hale's arm, hard, trying to force him to turn. Hale stumbled a step, caught himself, stayed upright. His boots scraped against the asphalt. The floodlights threw their shadows across the ground like jagged shapes. The checkpoint suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like the air itself had been pulled into a fist. Hale looked at Griggs, and his expression changed not into fear, not into anger, but into something far more chilling: disappointment. The kind of disappointment a leader feels when he watches someone choose the worst version of themselves. "Officer," Hale said, voice low, "you're making a mistake." But mistakes don't stop insecure men, they accelerate them. Griggs' breathing turned louder, faster, his hand gripped tighter, his voice cracked with adrenaline. And then he made the first real physical move, the one that turned everything from tense to irreversible. In one violent burst of motion, Hale was shoved. Hard. Time didn't speed up, it slowed down. The way it does right before impact, the way it does when your brain realizes the next seconds will change your life. Hale's shoulder hit the side of the SUV. The metal thudded. The sound cut through the night, and just like that, everything collapsed. The checkpoint wasn't a checkpoint anymore. It was a crime scene being born in real time under bright lights, surrounded by witnesses, with a camera recording every breath. And Griggs, in that moment, didn't look like a protector. He looked like a boy holding power he didn't deserve. The most terrifying thing about a body cam is that it doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about rank, reputation, or the story you want to tell afterward. It doesn't feel loyalty, fear, or guilt. It simply records, steady, unblinking like an eye that never looks away. On Officer Evan Griggs' chest, a small rectangular camera was already blinking, capturing everything in harsh, digital clarity. The angle was slightly tilted up, just enough to show Captain Marcus Hale's upper body, the bright glare of the checkpoint floodlights, and the thin line of darkness beyond the cones where the county road disappeared into night. The audio picked up breathing before it picked up words. Griggs' breathing was louder now, fast and tight, the kind that turns decision-making into reflex. Hale's was controlled, slow, measured, almost silent. Two different rhythms, two different kinds of training, two different definitions of strength. The moment Griggs shoved Hale into the SUV, the sound hit the microphone like a punch metal thudding under fabric and bone. It was the kind of sound that instantly changes a scene. Even people who pretend not to notice violence can't ignore that sound. It announces itself. It makes witnesses lift their heads. It makes the night feel smaller. Hale didn't yell. That was the strange thing. A lesser man might have cursed, might have panicked, might have let anger take the wheel. But Hale had been trained under pressure, where panic meant casualties. He absorbed the shove like a soldier absorbs impact, tightened his stance, stabilized his footing, kept his hands open. "Officer," he said, voice low. "I'm not resisting." He spoke like a man reading a protocol out loud to keep everyone safe. His tone wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't confrontational. It was almost clinical, like he knew that calm language sometimes prevents a bad moment from becoming a fatal one. But Griggs didn't hear safety. He heard humiliation. Because Hale wasn't bidding. Hale wasn't scared. Hale wasn't giving him the emotional power he wanted. And for a young officer fighting for dominance, that lack of fear is gasoline. You want to act smart? Griggs snapped, stepping closer, body filling the frame. "I'll show you smart." Hale turned his face slightly, not away, but sideways, trying to keep his profile visible to witnesses. That wasn't random. Soldiers learn how to think about angles, about observation. Hale knew, instinctively, that what gets seen is what gets believed. "Officer," he said again, slower this time. "You are escalating. I am cooperating. If you have a supervisor, shut up." Griggs barked. That word "shut up" wasn't policing. It was domination. It was resentment dressed as authority. And then Griggs did something that changed the entire tone of the night. He grabbed Hale harder, twisting his arm behind his back with a jerk that wasn't needed for control. The uniform creased. Hale's shoulder tightened. His boots scraped the asphalt. The camera caught it all: jerky motion, shifting shadows, the floodlights streaking across the lens. Hale winced, not dramatically, not for pity, just a reflex. A human flash of pain that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Easy," Hale said, and even that sounded measured. "You're hurting me." But pain, real pain, has a strange effect on ego-driven violence. Sometimes it makes the aggressor stop, and sometimes it makes the aggressor angry that the victim is still speaking with dignity. Griggs pulled tighter. "Stop resisting." Griggs shouted loudly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Loud enough to create a justification on record. It was a classic move, a line that too often becomes a shield. If the report says resisting, force becomes necessary. If the camera only catches pieces, the narrative fills the gaps. But the camera was catching everything. Hale's hands were open. He wasn't swinging. He wasn't trying to flee. His body language was stable, defensive, not aggressive. The truth was there, written in motion. And that truth enraged Griggs, because it meant that if this was ever reviewed, Griggs wouldn't look like a hero. He would look like what he was becoming. The next move wasn't slow. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't a stumble. It was a strike. Griggs shoved Hale again harder, and Hale's body hit the vehicle with enough force that the microphone clipped for a split second. The camera frame jolted. The floodlights flared. Somewhere behind them, a civilian muttered, "Yo, what the hell?" Another voice said, "He's Army." And for a brief moment, just a breath, the words "he's Army" should have cooled the situation. It should have triggered caution, respect, a pause. But inside Griggs, it triggered something darker. Resentment. Not against Hale personally, but against what Hale represented. Structure, honor, discipline, earned rank. The kind of respect you don't get by wearing a badge for 6 months. The kind of authority you can't fake. It wasn't just that Hale was calm. It was that Hale was unshakable, and Griggs couldn't stand it. "Army don't mean nothing here," Griggs snapped. "This ain't your base." The line sounded like jealousy more than law, like someone finally saying the quiet part out loud. Hale kept his eyes forward, but his voice dropped deeper, more serious, not angry, dangerously calm. "You are on camera," he said. "Stop. Right now." Those words landed heavy, because Hale wasn't threatening him. He was warning him. He was giving him an exit, a moment to choose a better ending. But Griggs didn't take the exit. He escalated like a man running from shame. He forced Hale down, trying to bring him to his knees. Hale resisted only in the way a body resists being harmed. Not fighting, not attacking, just stabilizing. A natural human refusal to be broken. Griggs misread that stability as defiance. "Get down," he yelled. Hale's knee touched pavement. His uniform darkened at the knee with damp asphalt. Gravel pressed into fabric. The camera caught Hale's face for a moment, teeth clenched, eyes steady, breathing controlled like he was holding a line against chaos. Then the checkpoint exploded into movement. Backup arrived. 2 officers moved in, one older, one younger, but neither moved like men stopping an injustice. They moved like men arriving to manage optics. The older officer looked at Hale, then looked at Griggs, then looked at the body cam. That glance said everything. It said, "This is going to be a problem." The younger backup officer reached for Hale's other arm. Hale didn't resist. He didn't pull away. He complied with the precision of someone trained to follow commands even when those commands were unfair. The civilian in the next car raised their phone. Another witness stepped out slightly from their vehicle. A flashlight beam from a different unit swept across the scene. Voices overlapped. Radios crackled louder. The checkpoint no longer looked controlled, it looked chaotic. And that chaos created the perfect cover for what happened next. Hesitation. Not Hale's hesitation. The department's. A supervisor approached Sergeant Lanning, mid-40s, calm face, tired eyes. He had the look of someone who had spent years smoothing problems instead of solving them. He watched Hale on the ground. He watched Griggs breathing like a cornered animal. He watched the witnesses. And then his eyes flicked again toward the body cam. He knew what had happened. You could see it in the tightness of his mouth. The way he paused just a fraction too long before speaking. The way his voice came out neutral, overly controlled. "All right," the sergeant said, stepping closer, palms out. "All right. What's going on?" Griggs started talking fast. Adrenaline talk, story-building talk. He was resisting, Sarge. He got an attitude. He wouldn't follow commands. Hale spoke only once, quiet but clear. "Sergeant," he said, "I am Captain Marcus Hale, United States Army. I complied with every order. Your officer assaulted me." The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. This was the turning point, the moment where truth could have been acknowledged, where leadership could have stepped in, separated parties, checked footage, de-escalated properly, done the right thing. But the sergeant didn't choose truth. He chose damage control. Because admitting wrong in policing doesn't just mean discipline. It means scandal, lawsuits, media, paperwork that follows you for years. It means the department's reputation takes a hit. It means the leadership looks weak. It means the city council starts asking questions. It means internal affairs start circling. And most importantly, it means the supervisor has to admit he failed to supervise. So instead of stepping into accountability, the sergeant stepped into strategy. He lowered his voice and guided Griggs a few steps away, just out of range of most witnesses' ears, but not out of range of the bodycam microphone. The camera captured their shapes close together, floodlights casting long shadows behind them, like prison bars. For a second, Griggs looked like a child in trouble, like he expected to be corrected. But the correction never came. Sergeant Lanning leaned in, speaking low, too low for the crowd to catch clearly, but clear enough on audio. "Listen," he murmured. "We're not doing this out here." Griggs swallowed hard. "Sarge, the sergeant cut him off. "I know," he said. "I know. Just write it up your way." Those words didn't sound dramatic. That's what made them terrifying. No screaming, no threat, no overt corruption, just quiet permission. Just the system whispering to the rookie, "Lie, and we'll protect you." Hale, still on the ground, could see them talking. He couldn't hear the words, but he could feel the shift in the air. The moment when an officer realizes he isn't only fighting one man, he's fighting the story the institution is about to write over him. His jaw tightened. His eyes lifted toward the canopy lights, bright enough to blur the stars. Not because he was defeated, because he was calculating. Because soldiers don't just survive attacks, they document them. And Captain Hale, bruised and pinned at a checkpoint that smelled like exhaust and arrogance, understood something with cold clarity. This wasn't going to end tonight. This was going to end in court. And when it did, someone was going to pay the price. That morning didn't bring peace. It brought a quieter kind of violence. The sun rose over the county like nothing had happened, warm light spilling across empty fields, frost evaporating off windshields, birds settling back into routine. But for Captain Marcus Hale, the new day didn't feel like relief. It felt like a new battlefield. The bruises on his shoulder and ribs were proof of what had happened, but the deeper damage wasn't written on his skin. It was written in what he understood about systems. A person can survive a shove. A person can survive humiliation. But a system can do something worse. It can rewrite you. It can reshape you into a villain on paper, while you're still trying to process the shock of being hurt in real life. By 7:12 a.m., Hale was sitting at his kitchen table in a gray hoodie, uniform folded neatly nearby like it belonged to a different version of reality. A mug of tea steamed untouched. His phone sat face up, still and heady, like a weapon he didn't want to pick up. Outside, the world looked ordinary. Inside, his mind replayed the checkpoint in forensic detail, the angle of the floodlights, the sound of boots on asphalt. The moment the sergeant's mouth moved close to Griggs' ear. "Write it up your way." Hale had seen war zones. He'd seen chaos that came from outside. But this was different. This was war that came disguised as procedure. He knew what came next. He'd studied it the way soldiers study enemy doctrine. Not because he expected to need it, but because he believed in discipline, preparation, and control. The fight was no longer going to be physical. It would be fought through timestamps, report language, and the kind of official truth that gets printed and filed and repeated until it becomes reality. Hale opened a notebook and wrote a single line at the top like a mission header. Incident, checkpoint, 9:47 p.m. Then he began listing what mattered, the order of commands, the exact words spoken, the names on badges, the presence of witnesses, the direction his body was turned. When he was shoved, he wasn't writing out of emotion, he was writing out of survival. In the Army, documentation is not a hobby. It's how you protect the truth when chaos tries to rewrite it. At 8:03 a.m., he called the police department, not 911. The front desk, the calm administrative line where voices sound polite and distant, as if violence only exists in paperwork. A receptionist answered with rehearsed warmth. "County Sheriff's Office, how may I direct your call?" Hale paused, controlled his breath. then spoke with the same calm authority he used in briefings. "This is Captain Marcus Hale, United States Army. I was assaulted last night at your checkpoint operation. I need to file a formal complaint and request immediate preservation of all bodycam and dashcam footage." The receptionist's tone didn't change much, but something subtle tightened, like a door closing quietly. "One moment, sir." He was placed on hold. Soft music. A loop. The kind that makes serious words feel small. Then a supervisor came on the line, Lieutenant Dennis Crow. The voice was polite, but the politeness felt practiced, like a suit worn over something colder. "Captain Hale," the lieutenant said, "I understand there was an incident last night. Incident, not assault. Not excessive force. Incident. Language matters." Hale heard it instantly. "Yes," Hale replied. "I want to file a complaint, and I want the footage preserved. I also need the incident report number." There was a pause, a small one. But pauses like that are where strategy lives. "Captain," Crow said, "we're still compiling paperwork. These things take time." Hale's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, in calculation. Footage preservation doesn't take time. It takes one email, one order, one click to flag evidence. The only reason to delay is if someone wants the footage to disappear into technical accidents. Storage overwrites, cameras malfunction, files corrupt. Evidence goes missing behind polite phrases. Hale leaned forward, slightly, voice still calm. "Lieutenant, I'm making a formal request right now on a recorded line. Preserve all footage related to that checkpoint operation, including Officer Griggs' body cam and any supervisor audio." The lieutenant cleared his throat. "Yes, sir. I'll note your request." "I don't need it noted," Hale said. "I need it done." Silence. Then Crow spoke again, still polite, but firmer now, like a system testing whether Hale could be intimidated through bureaucracy. "We'll handle this internally, Captain. Our internal affairs unit will review and determine appropriate next steps." Handle this internally. Hale had heard that phrase before. Not in war, worse in institutions. It means let us control the narrative before anyone else hears it. It means don't make noise. But Hale wasn't interested in noise. He was interested in truth. "Lieutenant," Hale said slowly, "I want confirmation in writing that the footage is preserved. If it isn't, my attorney will consider it evidence spoliation." Attorney, that word is a flare shot into the air. It changes the temperature instantly. The lieutenant's voice cooled. "Captain, you're welcome to seek legal counsel. We'll be in touch." The call ended, and just like that, Hale could feel it. The system had moved, not to correct what happened, to contain it. By mid-morning, Hale received a voicemail. A different number. The voice was Sergeant Lanning, the same supervisor who'd whispered to Griggs. The night before, hearing that voice in daylight made Hale's stomach tighten. "Captain Hale," Lanning said, "this is Sergeant Lanning. We need you to come down to the station and provide a statement. There were allegations you were non-compliant during the stop." And Hale froze. Non-compliant. It wasn't just a lie. It was a strategy, a label, a weapon. The system's first move was an apology. It wasn't accountability. It was narrative control. If they could paint Hale as non-compliant, they could justify escalation. If they could frame Hale as a problem, they could turn the department into the victim. Hale didn't call back immediately. He sat there, the phone in his hand, feeling something heavier than anger. Betrayal. Because he had complied. He had been calm. He had offered ID. He had spoken respectfully, and still they were rewriting him as a threat. That rewriting is what victims describe as the second injury, the emotional suffocation that comes after the physical harm. The attack is one thing, but the erasure is what haunts. Hale called a lawyer before he did anything else. A civil rights attorney in the nearest city, someone familiar with police misconduct cases. Someone who understood the language of 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 without turning it into theater. When the attorney spoke, his voice was practical and immediate, like a medic in an emergency. "Captain," the lawyer said, "do not go down there alone. Do not give them a statement without counsel present. And send a written preservation letter today. Bodycam, dashcam, dispatcher logs, radio traffic, CAD entries, everything." Hale breathed out slowly. CAD entries. Computer-aided dispatch, every stop logged, every unit time-stamped. The invisible trail that systems leave behind even when they lie. He typed the preservation request that same day. Formal. Clear. A soldier writing a mission directive. He listed everything. The checkpoint location, time, vehicle description, officers present. He demanded the footage be preserved. He demanded copies. He demanded records of any deletions or edits. Then he waited. And while Hale waited, the department wrote. Officer Griggs submitted his incident report by early afternoon because reports don't take time when your story needs to become official before the truth arrives. He wrote Hale as argumentative. He wrote Hale as refusing commands. He wrote that Hale tensed up. He wrote resisted like it was a magic word that could cleanse excessive force into lawful action. Department's paper shields went up fast. Shift supervisors signed off without asking questions. Internal review marked it pending. The narrative began forming like concrete, drying before Hale could touch it. And that's how bureaucratic power works. It doesn't need to beat you again. It just needs to file you into a category that makes your pain irrelevant. Hale started receiving that familiar, suffocating feeling, the sense that reality was being stolen. His bruises ached, but it wasn't the bruises that made him stare at the wall for long minutes. It was the thought that he could do everything right and still be crushed by the story written about him. That night, around 9:30 p.m., Hale sat alone in his living room. The lights were off, except for the glow of his laptop. On the screen, draft emails, legal language, scanned documents. In the corner of the room, his uniform still folded. He stared at it like it belonged to someone who believed institutions were always rational. The phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Heard what happened to you. They're lying. Don't let it die. Hale's throat tightened. He stared at the screen, heart beating slow. The message didn't come with a name. No signature, no request, just truth. And somewhere inside him, something hardened not into hate, but into resolve. The resolve of someone who has learned that justice isn't automatic. Justice is fought for, documented, forced into existence. Across town, in a small newsroom with peeling paint and stale coffee, a journalist named Renee Alvarez sat at her desk, editing a mundane city council clip. Her job had taught her to expect nothing and still be disappointed. Then an email came in, anonymous sender. No subject line, just one attachment. Her cursor hovered over it. The file name alone made her sit up straighter, like she'd been slapped awake. Checkpoint, then her cam, 9:47 p.m. She stared at the screen for a long moment. The room felt suddenly too quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then she clicked download, and in that click, the department's paper shields began to crack. The footage didn't arrive like news, it arrived like a rupture. It was a Thursday evening when it first hit the public quietly, almost politely, as if it didn't understand the damage it was about to do. A local journalist posted it with a caption that didn't try to be clever, no jokes, no rage bait. Just a plain line that sounded like disbelief being forced into words. Bodycam shows checkpoint encounter with U.S. Army captain ends in use of force. For the first hour, it moved slowly, shared by neighbors, commented on by people who recognized the checkpoint road, the floodlight glare, the county badge. Then it caught fire. By midnight, it wasn't a local story anymore. It was everywhere. On screens, in group chats, on radios, in patrol cars, playing silently on TVs mounted in bars. People watched it, the way you watch something you wish wasn't real, the grainy angle, the clipped audio, the officer's breathing, the shove, the yelling. The soldier's voice, calm and steady, repeating the same sentence like a prayer made of discipline. I'm not resisting. And then the moment, the entire town seemed to inhale at the same time. The supervisor's whisper, caught clearly in the microphone's cruel honesty, write it up your way. That's what broke the story open, not just the violence. The permission, the institutional wink. By sunrise, the county had split into two realities, each one sealed behind pride. In diners and barber shops and comment sections, the same argument repeated like a loop. One side said it with certainty, as if they'd never watched a video in their life. He should have complied. The other side answered with the kind of tired anger only truth can carry. He did comply. And that's the thing about footage like this. It doesn't end debate. It exposes what the debate was always really about. Some people weren't arguing about what happened. They were defending what they needed to believe, that badges don't lie, that the system protects the good, that safety is guaranteed if you behave the right way. The video threatened that comfort. It showed that compliance isn't always protection. Sometimes it's just submission dressed up as safety. The sheriff's office reacted the way institutions often react when their image is bleeding out in public. They released a statement before they released accountability. We are aware of the video circulating online. It read, the incident is under internal review. We ask the public not to rush to judgment, but judgment had already arrived. Not because people were impatient, because the video removed the need for imagination. The public didn't have to guess. They saw, they heard. They watched the lie being built in real time. Within 48 hours, the county commissioners demanded answers. The mayor called an emergency meeting. The sheriff's office tried to hold the line with the oldest weapon they had: respectability. They spoke of stress, safety, split-second decisions, but the footage destroyed that defense with brutal simplicity. There was no split second. There were many seconds. There were choices. There were opportunities to stop. And then there was the whisper, "Write it up your way." That whisper made it bigger than one officer. It made it systemic. When federal eyes turn toward a small town, the air changes. The tone changes. People stop speaking in confidence. Phones start being answered differently. Emails get forwarded carefully. Because now the county wasn't just dealing with outrage, it was dealing with law. The U.S. Attorney's Office requested records. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division made inquiries. Even the language in press briefings shifted: no longer incident, no longer misunderstanding, but allegations of civil rights violation. The words carried weight, the kind of weight towns aren't used to carrying. Captain Hale watched all of this from a distance that felt unnatural. He didn't do interviews right away. He didn't posture. He didn't talk like a man hungry for revenge. He looked like what he was, a soldier who understood consequences. When he finally sat with his attorney in a quiet office, walls lined with legal books and framed verdicts, Hale didn't ask for money first. He asked for the one thing he couldn't stop thinking about since the checkpoint lights burned into his memory. "Will they do it again?" he asked. His attorney paused, then answered honestly. "Unless it cost them something," he said. Yes. That was the bitter core of justice in modern America. Not morality, not shame, cost. So the lawsuit came like a hammer, a federal civil rights claim under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, alleging unlawful detention, excessive force, retaliation, failure to supervise, and deliberate indifference. Hale's legal team didn't only name Griggs. They named the supervisor, they named the department, they named the culture. Because culture is what whispers permission. Griggs was placed on administrative leave. That phrase sounded neutral, but everyone understood what it meant. The county was trying to slow the bleeding. He stopped showing up to roll call. His badge was collected temporarily. His service weapon was secured. The rookie who once needed control like oxygen now sat at home, watching his name spread across the internet like a stain. At first, Griggs tried to defend himself. He posted vague statements about context. He claimed he felt threatened. He said the video didn't show everything. But then people heard the audio again. They saw Hale's hands. They saw the shove. They saw the calm. And they heard the supervisor whisper. The defense collapsed, not with outrage, but with evidence. The department tried to survive. They announced reforms quickly, like a man pulling bandages over a wound that needed surgery. They promised retraining, de-escalation courses, bias awareness seminars, supervisory audits, bodycam, oversight improvements, automatic upload requirements, footage preservation protocols, random footage reviews by command staff. But the public didn't just want training. They wanted accountability. Protesters gathered outside the sheriff's office in a cold drizzle, holding signs with simple words that didn't need poetry. Discipline isn't violence. Compliance isn't consent. Who protects us from you? Some deputies watched from behind tinted windows, faces blank, hands resting near belts. Not moving, not speaking. That quiet posture looked, to the crowd, like the same culture that produced Griggs, the same stubborn silence. And Captain Hale, when he finally walked out to speak, didn't do it like a politician. He did it like a leader who has seen what rage can do when it becomes the only language people feel heard by. He stood at the microphone in a plain shirt, shoulders squared, voice calm. The cameras leaned in. The crowd quieted. "I'm not here to burn the department down," Hale said. "I'm here to make sure it stops burning people." The line landed like a truth the town wasn't prepared for. Because Hale wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking correction. He was asking the system to become worthy of the power it carried. And that's why the ending doesn't feel like fireworks. It doesn't feel like victory music. It feels like weight. The settlement negotiations were long. Numbers were discussed behind closed doors. The county tried to avoid admitting wrongdoing. Their attorneys argued technicalities. Language was crafted to protect reputations. But the footage made reputations irrelevant. The video had already spoken the most honest sentence of the entire case. Write it up your way. In the end, the outcome arrived the way justice usually arrives. Not as celebration, but as exhaustion. The department paid. Not just in money, but in consequences. Officer Griggs was terminated. Sergeant Lanning faced discipline and later resignation. The sheriff's office signed a public consent-like agreement of reforms and oversight, including stricter use of force reporting, mandatory supervisory intervention policies, and clear evidence preservation timelines. They introduced policy that required supervisors to activate their own recording devices during force incidents, closing the loophole where leadership could hide from accountability. But none of that gave Hale back what he lost. He received compensation, yes. He received public support. People thanked him for standing firm. Strangers called him a hero. But in quiet moments, Hale didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. He felt like someone who had watched the thin mask of safety slip off a system he once respected. He'd been raised to believe in institutions' military law, duty. But now, when a patrol car drove behind him at night, his shoulders tightened. When lights flashed in his mirror, his heart rate changed. Not because he was guilty of anything. Because he'd learned the real lesson. Innocence isn't armor when power isn't disciplined. Griggs, meanwhile, didn't become the villain of a movie. He became something more disturbing, a real person who had made irreversible choices and now had to live inside them. He lost the badge, he lost the uniform, he lost the identity he'd built around control. And when people lose identity abruptly, they either confront themselves or they rot inside denial. The town didn't return to normal either. It couldn't, because normal had been exposed as illusion. There were still checkpoints, still traffic stops, still quiet county nights where floodlights hummed and radios crackled. But now, whenever people drove past that stretch of road, they remembered. They remembered the way the light looked on Hale's uniform. They remembered the shove. They remembered the whisper. They remembered that the system isn't only made of laws, it's made of people. And people, when given power, don't always become better. In the final hearing, when paperwork became official and consequences were signed into reality, Hale sat in the courtroom and listened without emotion, not because he didn't feel, but because he'd learned that victory isn't loud. It's controlled. When it ended, he walked outside into daylight and felt something he didn't expect, not triumph, emptiness. Justice didn't feel like winning, it felt like surviving. A reporter asked him what he hoped people would take away from all this. Hale looked toward the sky for a moment, blinking against the sun like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Then he spoke carefully, as if choosing words that would outlive the moment. Power, he said, is a test, and not everybody passes. He didn't smile, he didn't pose. He just turned and walked away back into a world that would never feel as safe as it used to. And maybe that's the real ending. Not revenge, not celebration, not a clean wrap-up, just a warning that lingers like a bruise beneath the skin if power isn't restrained by conscience. It will always find someone to crush,